Christopher, thank you so much for joining the We Rise podcast today. I'm so excited for our conversation. Been looking forward to the opportunity for it. And in the times I've heard you speak before, your story has just spoken to my heart so much. So thank you for making the time to join today. Can you tell folks who I have the honor of having a conversation today, introduce yourself to listeners, please?
Thank you, Christine. My name is Christopher Rashad Green. I'm a community organizer here in the Richmond and Petersburg regions. I'm also a formerly incarcerated individual, what we call returning citizen. I have been boots on the ground for the past 8 years. I was released in August of 2013, but my journey actually started in 2010, last period of incarceration. I have never looked back. And with that, with this podcast, I would love to thank Christine for inviting me to share some of my story about resilience and empowerment and just overcoming and becoming involved and being proximate with our community members. And so in my current role, I am a community organizer in the Petersburg region, addressing a lot of systemic issues affecting families and community members, all the way from incarceration to youth justice. And so that's where I'm currently at presently in the Petersburg region. I reside in Richmond, Virginia. I've been here for a quarter of a century now. Hailing from New Jersey, my birthplace. I arrived in Richmond 25 years ago, and this is my adopted home. And with that, I would turn it back over to you, Christine. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So when you think about, your journey with so many different bends and twists and quarter of a century and, your birthplace and your adopted home place now, will you talk a little bit about what resilience has looked like in your own life? And I know everybody takes that word, it really looks a little bit different in everyone's life. Even just the growth that each of us go through and what that growth yields or what we learn from it. What has resilience looked like for you in your own life or in your community organizing work?
Oh, great question. I heard somebody used the term built-in resilience for Black folk. And for me, that really resilience, when I reflect back on it, it's very historical for me. I love history and learning about the history of my own people, Black people, and their period of enslavement really changed me. Not only in, I could say for enslaved Blacks, but all people as well. One of the most horrific stories I read was the autobiography of Adolf Hitler and his treatment of the Jewish people. And I was very young when I read this, and it really impacted me. How can folks actually do this to other people? And then learning about my own history. But I say all that to say is like looking back how resilient people are, how folks can be, especially Black people. We've been through so much, and I like to think of myself as somebody empathetic. So I feel a lot of pain that individuals go through. So when we talk about resilience, what I learned about resilience and how I've embraced it is really historically through my ancestors, my family members, of course, my mother, who was tremendous in my life as a single parent raising 4 of us. And she was very resilient. She overcame a lot of obstacles and did her best as a mother to instill that in me, that hope that is always remain hopeful, Christopher. I think she coined the term, keep hope alive before Jackson said it. But she instilled that in me. It's like there's always going to be a brighter day. There's always hope, especially for someone as me who was kind of gifted intellectually at a young age. And so I became resilient, but it wasn't easy. But resilience to me is like, if I can do it, if our people could do it, if communities of folks can stay resilient through all what we've been through, I have become now a perpetual optimist. So I see resiliency as just holding on and getting us to the other side. And then we'll pass the baton to somebody else to continue the journey.
Love that.
Resilience. I think about resilience, that's what comes to mind.
That's beautiful. And, when you talk about hope and some of the darkest moments in the history that's so being talked about so much more today, the history of enslavement, the treatment of different people that it's unfathomable today, and yet keeping hope alive. What allows you, or in your work with communities, what allows folks to keep hope alive in those darkest of moments or those most despairing of moments? What is it that allows that flicker, flame of hope, if you would describe it that way, to stay lit or to stay ignited?
Another great question. And automatically I think of people, how we keep hope alive and show people that there is a brighter day ahead is through our own lives. As a community organizer, we had an exercise one day doing some training, and what was the most sacred part of organizing? And I automatically thought relationships.
Mm,
That's the most sacred part. As an organizer, somebody in the community, as a leader in the community, you have to develop relationships, authentic friendships and relationships. And in doing so, your light shines, and your resilience and your determination, all that shine. And although even times I don't see it, sometimes my self worth is questions like, am I actually making a change? I have to,
mm,
I had to go through that at this time, but I know it's being seen. I know folks, and I've been approached many, many times over the years about my work and what I do and what I say impacts so many people. So I know it actually does. So in answering your question, the only way we're going to keep hope alive and give people a means to push through is through our own individual selves. And that's why it's so important as a community organizer to identify those individuals in the community, those leaders, those unseen leaders,
mm.
those
Yeah,
who have potential to be leaders, especially
totally.
our youth. So that's how we keep hope alive, is like individuals who are blessed enough and can be engaging, and that goes into this progressive movement of folks, black, white, brown, knowing that it's a racial question, but it's a human question as well. So you have to keep hope alive for all folks. I mean, blacks don't have a corner on agony, and we've been through a lot in our history, but so have other folks, and people are going through it right now.
Yeah.
So that's how we keep hope alive in the community, is by showing, doing our best as individuals. And then I always think of coalition building. I know over the past 8 years, I've built what they call social capital. I have so many friends and colleagues in my circle, and that's how we keep hope alive, by keep showing up.
Showing up. I'm taking notes here because you're dropping these words of wisdom. Can you go back a little bit, Christopher, and talk a little bit about, you mentioned how in your community organizing work, the relationship building, and it has to be both an authentic relationship, and that's how, those connections are built, are through relationships. And you also talked about finding unseen leaders. What a great term. Finding people who have that potential. Can you talk a little bit more about how you do that? How do you find and connect with people who are unseen leaders? And then how do you build relationships, authentic relationships, especially with people who might be closed to building relationships? Like what are those entry points, or what does that look like to grow and to build relationships in your community organizing work, or through, just the folks, in everyday life too?
Hmm. Thank you for that question. Reflecting back, uh, just as my role as an organizer and doing a little history, I know organizing and organizers have encountered a lot of resistance, a lot of struggles, a lot of challenges. So it's not an easy job. Definitely, at no point I would say it was easy. It was the best job I've ever had. My role now is like I'm doing something that I love doing, which
Mm,
is communicating and talking to people. So in that, there are certain qualities you have to have, or should learn to incorporate when you're doing this work, when you're building relationships. And I learned this from folks that went before me. uh, I would say empathy is one. I think we all have to develop a level of empathy, not sympathy, but empathy, to feel what another person feels and feel their pain and feel their joy as well. So you have to have empathy when you're approaching folks. And that number one in my book is empathy. And there are other traits that we need to incorporate. But then there's a level of trust, because people are trusting you, and that was a great thing. There's a lot of fear in the community and mistrust. So we have to present this. We have to be trustful. Am I as an individual? Am I trustworthy? Because I know this is what needs to take place in our communities when we're addressing these issues is trust. And so as leaders, as community leaders, organizers, just family members, is generally just, you have to have a level of empathy when approaching communities, establishing that trust and basically giving your all 110%. Because it's passion. Passion may drive the movement. I'm passionate about what I do, but that's only 10% of the equation. The passion won't change circumstances. It won't move people's hearts. It takes passion, and then therefore in my work is follow up, door knocking, grinding, talking to people, and that's not something everybody can do. Just a side piece. There was a survey I heard several years ago about public speaking, and how that was like the most fearful thing for most folks. The main thing they most fear, you would think, would be death or taxes, but public speaking was the number one on the list. People fear of public speaking, and I had that at one point. Even though I aspired for public speaking, but I was thrust into this role where I talked to 200 people a day at times. But I love doing it. I have to make sure that I take care of myself in the process. But to answer your question about how it looks like going into our communities, you just have to be open. It would help that if you actually went through some of these things and identified, so I think people who are directly impacted by what they advocate for really have a story to tell and really have a mission in front of them to share that, not only the story, but to empower others.
So having that lived experience to some degree too, being able to connect with people, it sounds like is key. Coming, from an open place. Can you talk a little bit more about how you see the difference between empathy or sympathy? And I agree with you 100%. And sometimes it's just a felt experience of being with people, what that is different rather than thinking about it. Can you talk a little bit more about what that difference is for you in working with folks?
Well, yes, sympathy and to me it means like you see something as your rational mind, your intellectual mind can see a wrong and you can understand it. So you have sympathy for those people. You have sympathy for a colleague. Somebody has cancer. You might not have ever experienced cancer, but knowing who you are and you do have feelings and emotions, you can sympathize with individuals about their plight, about what they're going through. Where empathy actually is what I've learned to be learned to realize is that empathy is a feeling more so than a feeling of sympathy is like you really can't connect. There's really no real connection versus empathy because it's actually a physical pain. When you're an empath or when you experience empathy, you actually feel the emotional pain of those who are suffering. And it is trying because when you're blessed with that, it can get to a level so high of empathy that it can really affect you physically. And so you have to learn to control that. But it is a gift to have that because in doing that, when you empathize and you can feel their pain, you can relate. In recovery circles, it's about not identifying. It's more so not identifying that what somebody's going through, but relating to what they're going through. And that only comes with feeling. A friend of mine, I used to say Brian Stevenson of Just Mercy, who I got to meet and I got to follow. He said that was the number one thing. There are 4 things that we as community members, organizers must do. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're my holy gospel now.
I would love to hear about them.
Brian Stevenson, and it's on YouTube. But there are 4 things that we as advocates need to embrace. The first one is being proximate, being close to individuals. We can help individuals from different areas and arenas, but we have to get close to their issues. We have to get close to the people we serve. That's being proximate. That's number 1 in his book. Number 2 is remaining hopeful, because we know the power of hope, what that could bring. Because in his words, hope can move mountains. He says, hope will make you stand up and speak when everybody's telling you to sit down and lay down. The third thing was changing this narrative that we have in this country, especially around criminal justice reform. We have to be brave enough and bold enough to address it and change the narrative. And for me, that means changing my own personal narrative from one of failure to one of succeeding, of success. in turn. So we have to change the narrative. And the fourth thing he said, which is so impactful, he said, we have to do those uncomfortable things as
Mm.
individuals if we want change. You know, there's Saturdays when we want to be home, we might have to be at a city council meeting or a PTA meeting. You know, we could be doing anything. You know, we might need to volunteer at the soup kitchen where we'd rather be home watching baseball. So those are, you know, in a
Mhm.
small level. So we have to do those uncomfortable things, things we're not comfortable doing. And I do that. Like for me, it was going in communities, going into areas, you know, low poverty areas where folks are living and dying. Because I come from those areas as well.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, being proximate, being hopeful, changing the narrative, and doing those uncomfortable things. That's the gospel for me. I've
Mm.
been rolling with that for several years. And I owe
Mhm.
that to my brother, Brian.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So you have these guideposts that help you know how do you want to navigate. Will you tell us a little bit more about the work you do in community organizing, and what kind of changes you've seen in your community or the region? What's helped you create a sense of belonging and to grow and be strong? A couple different questions woven in there.
You made me think of my former, one of my colleagues, my former employer, Tram Wynn of New Virginia Majority.
Mm.
She confronted, she didn't, she let me know one day, it's like, Christopher, you're the face of criminal justice reform in Virginia.
Mm.
I mean, it was a great honor, very kind, but I didn't see it as that.
Mm.
Many people will beg to differ. But being the face of criminal justice reform, based on the work, you know, the little work I've done, you know, I stand on the shoulders of those who went before me. I didn't recreate the wheel, but for me, it was just my time to step into this role of community organizer, which started with voter registration. Being that I had my rights restored in 2016, first time I voted in over 30 years. So for me, that was what we call a jump off point.
Mhm.
And and then actually being able to share my story of what I had been through all my life. You know, at the time, I didn't know where it was going. I never thought it would be, you know, I would be here in this position. For me, it was like my testimony. It was cathartic for me, sharing my story, and then becoming involved in voter registration efforts, becoming a voter registration organizer, which is where I really, like you say, this is where I really cut it right here, voter registration, because that put me in the community. I mean, this is where I literally talk to 300 people a day on
Mm.
some days, engaging with folks. And then restoration of rights, which was one thing that I was passionate about, really drove me to go out there. I felt like the postman, you know, through rain, through sleet, through hail, through snow. I'm going to bring that
Been there.
registration form to you. You're going to sign this restoration of rights form. That's how I felt. I mean, I would literally jump up every day. Excuse me, I'm getting excited.
Yeah.
And then from there, I went into an organizer around Court Watch. I was very blessed to start a Court Watch program with community members, addressing a lot of issues around bail and pretrial services, and just transparency and equity of our courts. And that evolved into a campaign for the right to vote for all. Before I go forward, even with the Court Watch, the work that the community members did, we had, I mean, it was a community-led initiative for Court Watch, and the outcomes and the data we collected were used in the General Assembly that
Mm.
following year
Mm.
in terms of trying to change the pretrial system here in Virginia. That was amazing. And then recently, the right to vote, the automatic right to vote, which we were pushing for Virginia. I was leading the campaign of formerly incarcerated folks and directly impacted folks. And so even this is during the entire pandemic, we mobilized folks. Over 300 people we actually engaged during the pandemic.
Wow.
We pushed and we advocated, and now we see that the right to vote is going to be a
Mm.
reality. You know, currently right now,
Yeah.
thanks to our efforts and the governor's efforts, you know, everybody has the opportunity to register to vote. Even people who are returning home, it doesn't matter if you're on probation or parole, you can register and vote. Big step. Uh,
Yeah. Absolutely. Huge.
and I was actually a part of that.
Yeah.
And this is the great thing, like when you say that my work and being able to see it, you see the work that I'm actually doing being implemented, seeing laws being passed, uh, seeing all these things. And I was in my some way a small part of it. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's
So that's,
empowering.
and that was the word when I got my voting rights back. When I would be asked about it, that was the only word I could think of.
Mm,
Empowerment. I was
mm,
empowered.
yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. So, you, there are many different ways that you've engaged in the community organizing work. When you think about, and feel free to take this to the personal level or, professional level, but when you think about what allows folks to engage, what is it that lets people work together collectively to be effective? What is it that you see that, what are those kind of points of, um, what's the word, like accelerators almost, that help folks coalesce and come together and create change and get bills passed and see change and feel like part of a big movement? What is it that allows community members to come together and do that?
Hmm. I don't think so much that allows them to. It's like we actually have to be actively engaged in making it happen.
Mm-hmm.
You can't sit back and wait. I mean, there are some movements that seem organic based on some of the circumstances, like Black Lives Matter. Um, it originated out of all the pain that we were going through. So it was more like organically, these folks came together and created Black Lives Matter. Uh, so in that sense, it's a little hard to kind of predict or say where, the
Mm-hmm.
outcomes in that response, in that respect. But I think like you said, for by again, it goes back to our leaders. I think being a leader is very
Yeah. Yeah.
to our leaders and supporters and those who do know and do have knowledge and access to resources. We have to create that for individuals, that points of entry,
Mm-hmm.
and then usually and basically when you identify these points of entry, there's usually like trauma around that.
Mm-hmm.
There's some injustices, some inequities around that in that arena. So that's where you're going to find folks who possibly at their lowest or feeling hopeless. And so that's when we have to come in as organizers, as supporters, as just good people, and come in and create that avenue for folks. We call it a ladder of engagement in organizing terms. A ladder of engagement meaning when you meet, from somebody from the beginning and you cultivate them and you help them grow to go up this ladder of engagement. It starts as a volunteer. You might become an active member, a core leader. Next thing you know, you're leading this initiative.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some components of organizing, which I've learned are true. But at that entry point, as you said, we have to identify those points of entry where people are lacking in services. And we can really read them off. There's no housing, employment, substance abuse, incarceration, domestic violence. We have all kinds of issues that we're facing right now. And for those who are suffering the most, identifying those points of entry where we can get them, because they never, there's really a lack of accessibility anyway in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
these silos that we live in and work around. So finding a point of entry for somebody and then being able to inspire them and give them hope, So it takes a village. It really does take a village to do it, not one individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so well said. One of the things that I've noticed in working with communities over time is that people often feel like they don't know how to engage, or they don't feel like there's a place to engage, or they don't know that their voice matters, or that they as an individual, really can make a difference, or where is there a place to create change. And I even use the term allow, not in an external sense of being allowed, but an internal sense of almost having that sense of, oh, wait a minute, and it's that connection, it's the relationship. And maybe it's the same that you're describing as the point of entry of seeing another community or another person who they can relate to in such a direct way. That's almost like what opens an internal door for folks to say, well, wait a minute, if they can do it, I can do it. And I want to do that too. And then it is that kind of, just everyday folks coming together to create change in ways they never have before. But it's that relationship that seems like over time, it's the trust and relationship are the two key elements for folks to engage.
A synergy is created. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the flip side, I guess you talked a little bit about points of resilience. What else, I guess, would you say about what helps a community create a sense of belonging or to grow and be strong? Or on the flip side, what holds communities back from creating change or creating resilience? And I know there are so many things, so feel free to take that in any direction you want.
Yes. And I always like to say, we know, with problems, we have identified many problems. So there's so many we can focus on. I think we should be solution based,
Mm-hmm.
more or less, and identify problems, like as you said, like community engagement. And that's what I'm doing right now in my role as an organizer in Petersburg. I'm actually doing a community assessment. I just started this job like 2 months ago. So for
Cool.
me, that would mean, like, again, identifying individuals in the community, identifying those key constituents, key players, uh, identifying, the issues that folks are involved in, that are suffering from. So it's basically doing assessment, talking to folks, I mean, at all levels, from the mayor on down to the brother on the corner, and getting that assessment. And then really it takes individuals. Again, it goes back to those who have actually been through this experience and lived it. And that's one thing I like about over the last 5 to 10 years. For me, in my eyes, I think we have become more progressive and accepting of people with lived experiences, and we value that more.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so crucial for us to identify those individuals that are suffering. But as you said, our people, well, not that you say, but scripture quotes, our people die from lack of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that many times in my work, it's that people just don't know. They don't know this. I didn't know. I mean, I was
Mm-hmm.
one of those for years. I considered myself intelligent and smart. But for 40 years, I couldn't stop the cycle. I couldn't jump out this vicious cycle I was in of incarceration and addiction. And then just one day, you know, I think it was this very inspiration. I call it divine intervention, but I really think it was a culmination of all my experiences. I just got to the point where I had to make a change,
Mm.
and I actively sought change and have been that way ever since. I was blessed with that, but I knew in that change I had to surround myself with other like-minded individuals, and it goes like building my social capital and my social network. So I made sure that network was small, but as it expanded, I couldn't stop it. It was like it started expanding.
That's awesome. And grew and grew. Yeah.
But to answer your question about that, for on a community level, whew, it's going to take, again, I say coalition building, and here again it falls back on individuals like me and others. And even when I'm addressing in those arenas around transparency and accountability for governments and agencies and institutions, I never fail to remember to remind folks that I also have to take responsibility. I have to be transparent. I have to be accountable as all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And 'cause now we talk like that, and here just in Richmond, we have all these different personalities. You have political leaders, you have self-appointed community leaders, and until we break that and get back to that village mindset. Now we're practicing it in our own little silos, like I said, but for me, it was like transforming communities.
Mm-hmm.
It really goes back into transforming the justice.
Yeah.
We talk about restorative justice practices, about forgiveness and second chances. So we should take that same concept on a community level. And my vision, my goal is to bring community leaders and people together, all of us come to the table, and community members, and start, I guess, what you call self-determination,
Mm-hmm.
taking charge of our communities. That means community policing, community education, uh, breaking that school to prison pipeline, making sure our students, like I went through the school to prison pipeline, so I
Mm-hmm.
experienced it. I know. And for years, I carried that guilt and shame
Mm.
until somebody told me I think it was 2 years ago, it's that you didn't fail. It said the system failed you.
Mm-hmm.
You were an honor roll student. How did you fall through the cracks? And I never looked at it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Totally different frame. Totally different frame. Yeah,
so we're talking
absolutely.
about community. There's so many solutions. We can say just basically unifying. Unity is one. Uh, but it's really a challenge for leaders, for our political leaders, our local leaders, and our community leaders. We have to come together at some point and find common ground. And not to say the work isn't happening. I think a priority would be our youth justice, our
Mm-hmm.
schools, because they are our future, as
Mm-hmm.
the song says. And so that should be a priority, even though I address criminal justice and reentry policies. I mean, folks coming out, and generally my folks I deal with are older,
Mhm.
but we should be more preventive and looking at youth justice
Mhm.
and basically abolition of prisons as they are today.
Mhm. And what excites you? What opportunities or program excites you, either in youth justice or in the community broadly? What excites you about what's happening? But I would love to hear more about youth justice work, that you are feeling inspired by.
Mhm. What excites me? Oh God, I don't want to take this the wrong way, but just recently I reflected over my last 11 years since
Mhm.
my journey started, and I didn't realize how much I had accomplished and how much I had
Mm.
overcome. So I recently did become excited the fact that I've been able to find that within myself. It's like I'm relevant. I have done some work. You know, I am somebody, so to
Mm.
speak.
That's beautiful.
But at times, like I said, the monsters in my head will tell me you're not doing anything.
Mhm.
But I can see the work, especially around voter registration.
Mhm.
We still have a ways to go, but I love seeing the fact that now that folks are engaging. And I didn't vote for 30 years. So now I voted for the past, what,
Yeah.
4 years now, consecutive every election. But that's one change I see, like, especially around voter protections, people have a chance to really engage. And we can see the work. I mean, we can see the change across the country. We can see, look at our last election, but there's still some challenges ahead. So I love seeing that. Another thing that I'm really kind of proud of and glad to see is like the community members I have engaged over the years are actually actively taking roles, leadership roles, staying
Mhm.
engaged. I have a brother, Roger. He's a community member. He's a football coach. We met about a year and a half ago, and now he's just taken off. He's a leader in the community. He's
Mm.
engaging on different levels. Who else is that? I mean, just young folks that come to me. There are a lot of young people. You know, I had to accept my elder status at some point.
Just own it.
I want to be young forever. I feel young most
Yeah.
days. My
Yeah,
61 years doesn't show up all the time.
you don't you come across as so young, and energy so present and vibrant and connecting.
Yeah, and it's the people. And I said that folks that come to me and share that with me, like especially young folks, you know, young people like in their 20s and
Yeah.
30s, who confirm or who share with me how I've inspired them and how they look at me as for inspiration. Uh, I know that's one of the best parts of my work is
Mm.
seeing that I am impacting folks and folks are actually jumping into this fight because it can be a lonely. Somebody for an organizer is lonely. Like they say,
Yeah.
it's lonely at the top sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
learning more to manage. Like I said, I think in my role as a leader is like to inspire and to mentor folks. Of course, that's another component I want to get into
Mhm.
mentoring, and then
Mhm.
managing folks, managing coalitions, and managing people's needs and wants. So it's all a process. I still consider myself a student.
Yeah. Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit more about what that well, I have two questions. I'm gonna what does that mentoring look like? Are those folks who are coming to you saying, "Hey, would you mentor me? How is it that you've learned what you've learned?" Do people just pop up? What does that look like? And then managing, what does that look like? Managing coalitions.
Hmm, okay. On the mentoring piece, I don't think I was ever mentored as a youth.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
didn't have a real male presence or
mm,
presence in my life that was consistent. So I know that for a fact that I was lacking that growing up,
mhm,
being raised by my mother. There were
mhm,
individuals in my life who I looked up to. Unfortunately, it was on the negative side. I started
mhm,
following like drug dealers and folks like that became my inspiration and my role
mhm,
models for a minute. But and this is funny. I was at a health equity conference sponsored by the Virginia Department of Health one day, and
mm,
a young lady walked up to me and asked me, "Are you mentoring anybody?" And I said, "No." she's like, you need to mentor somebody. Everything that you're doing, you need to be mentoring some young persons.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like about 4 years ago. And I
Okay.
never forgot, I know the sister. I can still see her face when she asked me that question.
Yeah.
And then during my organizing work, like I said, there were young men and women who just gravitated to me, just
Yeah.
wanted to get up under my wing.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
had individuals ask me to mentor them, and but I wasn't really in a position because it was new to me,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a heavy responsibility, which I kind of ran away from for many years. I mean, I have children. I wasn't in their life. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a great father. I can
Mm-hmm.
admit that today. I wasn't a great father at all, and that's one of the things I carry with me. That part of
Mm-hmm.
that guilt and shame I carried for many years,
Mm-hmm.
but I overcame that. But as far as mentoring, and funny you should say that with the reentry program I'm starting to launch. It's called Freedom Unlimited.
Mm-hmm.
Mentoring will be a component of it. And I have teamed up with another young man who's formerly incarcerated, and he actually his mentorship program, but we're going to work together to get it up and running.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also part of a mentorship program in Chesterfield. It's called Launch.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's just formed. They just actually formed their 501c3.
Cool.
They're going to launch it with a 3-day summer camp in Chesterfield, and I'm proud to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the mentoring piece, I know how important it is.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the takes the village piece,
Mm-hmm.
but that is one thing that, especially for formerly incarcerated individuals and returning citizens, we are obligated to give back. I feel as though anybody who has experienced that, there should be some level of giving it back through mentorship, through guidance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not everybody can be a mentor, but if you are able to, and I would love to fill that role one day
Mm-hmm.
in my elder status, sit back.
Mm-hmm. Owning it. Yeah.
And then with the managing campaigns and managing, initiatives, it goes back to, again, to the relationship piece of organizing. It's about being authentic, being relational. And if you can, I mean, really, trust goes a long way. And I learned this. It's like when we formed the Court Watch Initiative in 2018 and we launched it, most folks said it would take a year. We were up and running in 3 months
Wow.
and in the courts collecting data
Mm-hmm.
for this initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing how folks came and just embraced their role.
Mm-hmm.
I just made the call. It was to the point where I didn't even have to be involved in the initiative. I could
Mm-hmm.
take off for a week and the work would still get done.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you know you're doing good work as an organizer. And that goal
Yeah.
is to be, when you empower folks, when we support folks with those type of initiatives, manage them well. Your goal should be to walk away from it, and
Mm-hmm.
the community members are still active,
Yeah.
and it still grows without you. That's a level of success. That's when you know, as an organizer, you succeed. You don't have to be hands on.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to managing, and I'm learning this is like part of leadership development, how to manage individuals, manage resources. But I think I've done a heck of a job so far managing people.
Mm-hmm.
Especially people who are directly impacted like me. Because when I see those individuals, I see myself. So how would I want to be treated?
Totally. Yeah.
And it was funny. I have to share this though,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
when I'm engaged with community members, I want to give back. I would love to provide incentives. I don't care if it's a gift card, a meal, a pat on the back. I mean, there's always need for incentives, because I needed that when I started early in my work. I was going to a lot of meetings expecting a meal. I mean, an actual meal, because I was hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helped.
Yeah.
I can't say that was the reason I went, but it sure helped. And
Absolutely.
on that level, but organizationally, we don't want to use incentives. Organizations don't want to use incentives like that to bring folks out. We want to come out, this sense of civic engagement.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't talk to folks like that who are suffering and in survival mode. So I've always believed in incentives, and I was chastised for that sometimes, but I can't help what I have to. And that's how we reach out to folks, establishing a relationship of trust.
Totally. Two of my guideposts just had a little echo there, so I'm gonna just repeat that. Two of the things I always look for at community meetings are, can we provide childcare, and do we have food? Because There are babies and there are elders too who need care, and people are hungry. So are we doing our job by having childcare and food are two good guideposts for me. So I do want to go back just a little bit. You said something so striking a little while ago. Let me know if you don't want to go here, but you talked about your own journey of learning, and you said you learned that you are relevant. You said, I am relevant. But you also talked about how there are kind of monsters in your head who said, no, you're not. What process, because we all have this, we all have those internal monsters that tell us one thing or another, but can you talk a little bit more, Christopher, about what your journey looked like to tell those monsters you're not having the floor today, and for you to embody that I am relevant and to step into that elder role that you're doing so beautifully today?
Thank you. It really goes back to trauma, and trauma is something I just recently learned about in the last 5 years. How I didn't know that, I thought incarceration for me growing up was normal,
Mm-hmm.
experiencing those periods of
Mm-hmm.
incarceration and all the trouble. I related it to trauma, so I learned more about trauma informed care and the history of trauma. There's a great documentary out about the history of trauma. It's entitled Resilience. Is the actual two physicians who started this trauma informed movement. And for me, it was like, blew me away. It blew me away because
Yeah.
it talked about me. Uh, so that I went through, as a child, like I said, experienced my first period of incarceration before my 15th birthday. And from that point on, it was like in and out over a 4-year period,
Mm-hmm.
literally about 16 years of incarceration and all the other traumas that went with it.
Mm-hmm.
And learning how trauma carried over into my adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my behaviors and my thoughts. So I really had low self-esteem growing up. Even though people wouldn't think, but my self-esteem level was in the in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a lot to mask those feelings. It was substance abuse, addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so now learning about that. So again, back to education, having knowledge. Once I learned of it, I was able, they say if you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
So I actually did better. So I learned more of it. And, so I actually sought ways to address it through individuals, doing any workshops, or anything I could learn more about through my own research, learning about those monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more I learned, the more empowered I got,
Mm-hmm.
because I looked at it as like one of those obstacles I had to overcome. Also, now I got to the point where I can address it, actually talk to it. Just for one example, with all the trauma I've suffered. And so when I'm in a crisis moment and when things aren't going my way, of course, my mind and my body will revert back to what makes me feel good. And I hate, and what I share is like 40-year addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And since 11 years ago, my last time using, I've had the urge to use maybe 4 or 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
You would never think, like, with everything you're doing, what will make you think? But that's the nature of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm to the point when I get those thoughts, I actually can talk. I actually turn my head and it's like, no, we're not going here.
Right.
We're
This is
not
what's
doing
up.
that.
Yeah.
Because I always go back. I use the tools I've learned in recovery
Mm-hmm.
and through my life. And so I talk to it, I rebuke it,
Mm-hmm.
and put it out there, because I know what I share in my bio that's coming out. It's called Gorilla Unshackled. Is that I have a gorilla. I started off with a monkey on my back, and over a 40-year period, it turned into a 700-pound silverback gorilla.
Yeah.
And it lurks there behind me. It's still there, even though I'm unshackled. 11 years now, it's always there. And so if I ever think about going back in that way, I go back to 2009, one of the lowest points in my life. And I think about that, and it's automatically, it's like, oh no, I can't go back there. So that, for me, that's how I overcame my monsters. Now, I didn't overcome with the help of many, many individuals, friends and colleagues, significant others, the good and the bad. But I've learned to address it. And it's still every day, it's an everyday fight. And when they say, in an addict, always an addict, I don't conform to that terminology, but I know addiction is real. I'm not an addict, I've recovered, but I know it's real, and I don't take it lightly. I
Yeah.
actually have a family member in active addiction, or
Mm.
really close family member, who, even with all I know, I had to cut them off
Yeah.
because they were, with myself, I had to take care of myself.
Yeah. It's so core, that self-care, especially as we engage more broadly, it's, yeah, coming back to the heart. So, as we get ready to close soon, Christopher, you've talked about this a little bit, but feel free to go in either way or both ways with this, but what key lessons learned would you share with others who are kind of starting a journey of creating change in their communities? Or what do you wish someone had told you 5 or 10 years ago about this work? So, what lessons learned, or what do you wish someone had told you? They're kind of flip sides of the same coin to some degree. Feel free to head in either direction.
Yes. Well, I know I can talk about lessons learned. I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned is having trust. Because when I started this journey, there was I committed myself in my journal, because I used to journal a lot. So it was consistency and trustworthiness. Those were two things that were
Mm,
vital in my growth and development. Being
mhm,
consistent, being able to show up, no matter what it is, and being trustful. I mean, I couldn't even trust myself. So I had
mm,
to learn to trust myself, and then and trusting others. That was big, giving up. That's a lot when you have to trust others just on blind faith, and from a spiritual perspective, and I am a spiritual person. So I knew that I was covered at that time, because I asked for guidance and I was given it. But
mhm.
sometimes, you gotta be careful what you ask for.
Because you might
It
get
might not taste good,
it. Yeah.
but it might be good for you. So
Yeah.
what I've learned, based because I had a lot of biases, I had prejudices too. I had
Mhm,
bias. I was kind of conservative. I was raised in the Islamic faith.
mhm,
Uh, so I wasn't very religious. I consider myself spiritual, but I had all these biases about white folks and the system, and I was very cynical. I didn't
mhm.
vote. So for me, I had to just basically do a whole paradigm shift within myself and just start trusting folks and reaching
Mm,
out to folks. And one of the things I want to teach in reentry is about social capital, which
mhm.
means relationship building. And I can actually, from experience, and I can actually say that I have real friends and colleagues. Where at one time I had nobody but myself. I have hundreds, thousands of folks that I could reach. I ain't gonna say many. I'm getting carried away. I have many folks in my circle, friends. I mean, I actually have friends and colleagues.
Yeah, who are close to you, who are there for you and part of your everyday experience of how you engage in the world. So different than feeling alone in the world.
So the lesson learned from that is trust, and just trusting in other individuals. But it really trusting in yourself. So it really takes a really introspective look within yourself. And that's hard for some people. Denial is real.
Mhm.
Uh, Wanting to stay ignorant, arrogant. People don't want to face the truth about themselves. I learned that, and especially in incarceration,
Mm,
folks, guys are so big to want to be seen, but don't want to be held accountable.
mm,
To
mm,
actually what they profess to be.
mm.
It's like, don't get into this work for the spotlight, the limelight. It's definitely not the money. You don't get into this work for the money. It's
Yeah.
about the path.
Yeah.
But in order to get there, you have to start. And for me, if a lesson learned is like, and it's kind of selfish. That initially it was about me. It was all
Mm,
about my health, my well-being, what I need to do, and gradually expanded out to
mhm.
those and close to me, my family members, whenever possible. That's one of the biggest challenges, your own family members. And that's historical. I mean, even the
Yeah.
prophets had their own family members go against them.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
Yeah.
So that was a lesson learned. It's trust, real trust for within yourself. And the other one was, if I can go back 5, 10 years and give myself advice
Yeah.
as far as the work we're doing now,
Mhm.
or if somebody else, say one of my young mentee brothers, uh, my advice to them in regards to the work in this country and the work that we're doing to uplift our communities, it has to go back to the beginning. It's like you have to develop that level of empathy. You have to. If you're going to do this work, it doesn't mean you have to be rah rah on the front
Mm-hmm.
lines. But as I tell folks, I've spoken to a lot of middle class communities, a lot of white folks, lawyers, and it's not about, like you say, getting on the front lines and being that rah rah person. But if you have a skill set or a gift or a desire, there's somewhere that you can put the work in.
Mm-hmm.
So as a young man, oh, great example, great example. Let me share this.
Yeah.
Young man just coming out, just came home. He's been home 30 days.
Mm.
He was incarcerated like 4 years.
Mm.
Went through a lot of trauma in his life. Came home within the first month, had his license, has his paperwork all together. He's been hired as an organizer for an organization. His first month out, I got a chance to meet him. We sat down, chopped it up for about 3 hours. And so I had the opportunity to share with him what I learned. Because he was basically starting his whole journey, and I saw myself in him.
Mm.
And so I was able to give him some nuggets, about being protecting himself, protecting his heart.
Mm.
And in this world, we have so many distractions. And I can say that's one of the many distractions for returning citizens is what? Sex.
Mm-hmm.
You're wanting that companionship. Everybody wants companionship.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the downfall of so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Want to either go back, and I'm not going to lie, I did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to reignite an old relationship. It lasted 18 months. Fortunately, I was able to get out of it unscathed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was able to tell him, it's like, on this journey, and this was shared to me by an old head back in the day. The first 6 months out, you have to be so laser focused.
Mm.
It's like you have to save every penny you get. You have to make sure your circle stays very, very tight.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that you learned on the inside. And like me, he started his reentry program upon his incarceration, not when he got out. And that's what I did for 3 years. I prepared for coming out for 3 years. So he's very prepared. I asked him, did he have any distractions, any girlfriends, any significant others in the picture? He was like, no. I was like, that's good. You have a plan. Yeah, and just, he's so excited. He's very, very excited. And so I always want to temper that. I don't want to discourage them, but I just want them to keep it real. It's like, just make sure you take care of yourself and everything else will take care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
But and I've always shared this with young folks, how powerful they are.
Mm-hmm.
In the jails, when I used to tutor in the jail, I would always make sure to let folks know that your voice is very powerful. People really listen to you. I try to dispel that myth, like you don't have a voice. Even though at the same time I'm struggling to share my voice, but in certain arenas, certain small circles, I will speak out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I make sure that they have the same message. So my advice to young folks and to people just coming out, your voice matters. I mean, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, just your voice alone. But if you continue to learn, are open and trusting, like I was, the words will come. And then so you temper your passion with like everyday life things, but you have to always be looking to grow. You can't stay locked into a mindset of like this is how it was, this is how it's going to be. No, worlds have to open up, and it's like trust and knowing that your voice really means something. But I heard this from a legislator one time. It's like they're not registered voters. We don't listen to them. Basically, that's what they like inmates. They don't register voters. I said, but their family members are. So that's why I say so. Make sure you empower yourself. You have to always look at ways to empower yourself in a holistic, in a nurturing way. And I did that. I mean, I made connections with men and women who nurtured me and supported me. And people I could cry to. I mean, I've never cried. I've cried so much in the past 5 years, and I'm ever.
Yeah.
I mean, I was able to emotionally release what we call purge a lot of those demons through crying and through that. So it's not an easy road, but it's rewarding. Even sitting here now with you talking about it, I reflect back at how my life has been very good.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So as we get ready to close, I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to share with folks, Christopher, and would love it if you could let folks know how they can learn more about your work, how they can learn more about the work that you do as well.
Well, this is not a plug for my employer, but they are a great organization. I was recently hired by the Legal Aid Justice Center of
Mm,
Virginia. They're
mhm,
based out of Charlottesville.
mhm.
Great organization. They've been around for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I actually have a lot of colleagues and friends. We work, on different initiatives and things in the community and the state. And so I was recently hired on. They actually created a position for me
Mm,
in the Petersburg region. So I'm a community
awesome.
organizer for the Legal Aid Justice Center. And Legal Aid Justice Center, they basically a legal firm which provides pro bono services free of charge for everyone.
Mhm.
And so to be associated with them, I know this is another part of my growth and development because they are an organization that take care of their people.
Mhm.
It's like working with them initially, I didn't know they were all lawyers. I thought they were just community organizers.
Right.
But these are lawyers that go on the field and work and address a lot
Right.
of issues.
Mm.
So my role now is I've worked around the Richmond city region for the past 5, 6 years, but I always thought of Petersburg as a sister city,
Mhm.
but I knew the challenges they were experiencing.
Mhm.
So I saw this as an opportunity for
Yeah.
personal development and also help some folks in that community. So they created this position for me.
Cool.
So I'll be addressing Petersburg, Hopewell, Colonial Heights, all that region, the Tri Cities region.
Mhm.
And like I said, I'm going in now doing an assessment of community members. Over the past 2 months, I think I've talked to over 100 people already.
That's a lot of conversations to have in 2 months. That's awesome.
So that's where I'm at now. I'm also, like I said, I'm launching a reentry program called Freedom Unlimited. It's spelled Freedome. Freedom Unlimited. Play on words of freedom, meaning to free your dome or free your
Uh-huh.
mind.
Mhm.
It actually was. It came about in 2010. It was July 22nd, 2010, when I actually formed this concept. I actually wrote out the reentry plan 11 years ago.
Mm.
And actually, I made the logo because I'm an artist also. I do
Mhm.
self portraits. So I
Mhm.
created the logo and the programming 11 years ago. And
Mhm.
now it's actually coming into fruition. And I'll send you a link and I'll send you our logo.
Love
But
that.
now
Yeah, we'll include that. That's awesome. We'll share that out for folks to learn more.
it's actually happening now. So this is a Freedom Unlimited is a 501c3 that I formed. Oh, it's amazing. I formed a
Mm.
LLC and a 501c3 in the last
Awesome.
3 years
Mm.
around reentry,
Mhm.
around consulting. I have a consulting agency, which I plan to eventually, hopefully, will be staffed with formerly incarcerated folks who
Mhm.
people lived experiences. That's
Mm.
a vision of mine. And the Freedom Unlimited has a reentry program called Real Talk for Returning Citizens.
Mm.
We have a curriculum based on health disparities, all those social determinants that affect folks when they're returning. We know that priorities are our workforce, like employment and housing. Those are definitely real issues, but we never address what put folks in there, what led them to be
Yeah.
incarcerated.
Yeah.
Then all they'll do is recidivate. And
Mhm.
Virginia has a funny way of stating recidivism rates like they're the lowest in the country. Uh, but, and it can be misleading.
Mhm.
Not to say it's like people just aren't getting out anymore with the
Mm.
extended sentences. Not many people are being released as they were back in the day.
Mm. Wow.
So maybe that's why people aren't
Yeah.
reoffending because most
Right.
folks are still inside. That's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
another perspective.
Right.
But Freedom Unlimited wants to address those social determinants to empower individuals from within. And so we are hoping to launch that. And I know being who I am, I can't do everything. So we have
Mhm.
some competent people in our organization,
Yeah.
staff members who actually are certified and qualified to run it. As I said, I'm still a client. I might be the president, but I'm a client.
That's awesome. Great. Well,
And so,
we'll
so outside of that, between Freedom Unlimited and my new job, my new role in Petersburg as an organizer, like I said, right now, that's where I'm at right now. I'm speaking. I'm on the call with you. I still like to share my story
Mhm.
because it empowers others. I
Mhm.
did many documentaries, but at this point right now, it's like I have to prioritize. So my work in Petersburg and my personal development have to come first. I have to make sure I'm safe I mean, I actually practicing self-care. I actually took
Hmm.
2 mental health days this week.
Yay. That's so important. So key to
Mental
keep
health days.
that oxygen mask. So essential.
McDonald's won't give you a mental health day. Burger King.
Doesn't help. Doesn't help. Awesome.
That's where I'm at today.
Anything else you want to share before we wrap up today, Christopher?
I always want to give a shout out to my mother, my
Mm,
mom,
mm,
and those, like I said, who went before us. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those who went before me, the ancestors, the elders, my family members. I want to give a shout out to all those in my circle, all those who support me, all those who don't support me. It's all good. There's lessons learned in that as well. And that's basically, I want to thank you for inviting me on here. Like I said, these moments are very cathartic for me.
mm,
Helps me to purge,
mm,
helps me to self-reflect, and also able to inspire others.
mm-hmm. And so beautifully, just you shared so much about not only how to do the work internally and externally and community, what the arc of living and learning looks like. So thank you so much for sharing so much so beautifully. So Christopher, thank you for joining today. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
Mhm.